Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this online session where we're actually going to launch the World Bank's Pakistan Variable Renewable Energy Locational Study. And with me today, I have the people who've been working hands-on in this study. And I'd like to, first of all, welcome them and ask them to introduce themselves so that you can get to know them a little bit better. So first, Oliver, could you please introduce yourself shortly so everyone could get to know you?
Hi there, Oliver Knight, Senior Energy Specialist in the World Bank based in Washington, DC, and I work primarily on Pakistan and very closely with my colleague, Anjum Ahmad, who's also connected. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Oliver. Next, I'd like to ask Tobias to introduce himself, please. We cannot hear you, Tobias. Sorry, could you take the mute off your microphone?
Yes, my name is Tobias Merz from 8.2 in Germany, and I've been working a lot on projects in Pakistan lately, and also being very closely involved in this study that we're presenting today.
Excellent. Next, I'd like to ask Hassan to introduce himself, please.
Yes, thank you. It is Hassan Zaidi. I am CEO of Power Planners International. It's a lead company working in Pakistan on renewables and other grid connection studies. Our main area of strength is promoting renewables in Pakistan. And in this study, my company, PPI, Power Planners International, and 8.2 Germany have worked as joint venture, and we have produced this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hassan. Please, Garwin, could you introduce yourself? There we go.
Yes, good afternoon. Salam alaikum. My name is Gavin Riesmann. I'm Managing Director of 8.2. 8.2 is a technical commercial consultancy focused on renewable energy. We are based in Germany and working in Pakistan since 2014. And yes, my background is about 30 years in the energy sector, of which 20 in renewable energy space. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Erwin. And last but most certainly not least, we have also Wazim with us, but unfortunately, you'll get the introduction from him a little bit later on because he's not joined yet. So for now, what I would want to do is actually let you know about this session, okay? And Oliver, you can prepare your presentation because Oliver is going to give us the context of this study and how it happened. But I'd just like to give you some housekeeping things. And first is we're recording this session and we're going to send it to you. So you don't have to worry, you'll be able to watch it again. Also, you will get the materials, so you're going to be able to check them too. So don't worry about that. Next, I'd like to ask you please to send your questions using the Q&A box, which is at the bottom. And I really mean this because we actually have two people that are now connected as panelists, actually ready to answer your questions. So please feel free to send the questions through because someone will see them. And we have budgeted 15 minutes at the end of the session also to answer them. So don't be shy, send your questions. And without further ado, I'd just like to ask Oliver to please share your screen, and I will give you the floor to make the introduction and the remarks that will actually give context to this study. Thank you very much, Oliver.
Thanks, Belen.
Can you make that into a large presentation mode? Hi, Oliver.
Some printed copies very recently to all the key stakeholders in Pakistan. And just to put it into context, these are the 4 studies that we've been working on. The first, and this is all within our support to the government of Pakistan on renewable energy policy. The first actually was published in November 2020, and that's the VRE integration and planning study. VRE is variable renewable energy, which is essentially solar and wind. This really set the context for what capacity expansion in Pakistan could look like, and helped inform the indicative generation capacity expansion plan of 2047, which was published around a year ago. We then have this second study, which we're publishing now, which is really a follow-on to that first study and is intended to help understand where the renewable energy, the solar and wind, would optimally be located in the country. And I'll say a little bit more about how this study came about shortly. We're also working currently on two further studies. Firstly, a VRE competitive bidding study. Obviously, as many people connected will understand, the government has already stated a policy to move to competitive bidding, but this hasn't happened yet. So we're very keen to support the thinking around how to implement competitive bidding and what that would look like and all the different permutations and how it would best be carried out. And then finally, we just recently embarked on a new study looking at a lot of the technologies a lot of the kind of supporting technologies around distributed energy. In fact, 7 technologies are included there. And that's really to try and understand what might be coming down the line, looking at some of the things that are not yet common in Pakistan, like energy storage and mini grids and solar water pumping, etc. And those two will be coming this year as well. So just to turn to the VRE locational study, we originally commissioned this in support of the Sindh Solar Energy Project, which is a World Bank finance project in Sindh, $100 million. In fact, people in Pakistan today may have seen some adverts in Dawn and other newspapers in relation to that project, because the solar home system component is taking off today. But that project also has utility scale solar. And so this study was originally commissioned to help figure out where those solar parks should go. Very soon after we commissioned it, we got a request from the government of Pakistan to expand it to cover all of Pakistan because of the importance of this work. And so we adjusted the study to do that. It's intended to provide high-level guidance on where the solar and wind development should occur, and really to within the context of the government targets for renewable energy, which is 30% by 2030. So it should be looked at in that context, and alongside the report that we published in November. The dates in the report are not as important, I think, as the key headlines that come out. And so when you're hearing from the consultants on the content of the report, focus less on the dates, because the dates obviously now may also change with regard to the pandemic and other issues, and focus more, I think, on the strategic issues and where the solar and wind needs to go. We did a lot of consultation. We had a workshop in 2019. We briefed the minister and the secretary several times. We also had a formal written period from July to September, just over 2 months. And we received a lot of comments from federal agencies and also PEPCO. And those are all incorporated. Just to say, we'd still recommend, obviously this is a high level study, we do recommend that provinces look to follow up on this, in particular, looking at more granularity on land, environmental and social issues. So when planning further solar or wind parks or smaller developments, further studies, of course, needed for that. The published report, here's the link. We will obviously circulate that to those connected afterwards. And we also have a blog that went out today. So with that, hopefully that's sets the scene. And with that, just like to thank the consultants and also my colleague Anjum for all the support they've given. And let's hear now about the report itself. Thanks, Belen.
Thank you very much, Oliver. That was great. And we will also put the link on the chat so that all of you can check it whenever you like. Tobias and Hassan are actually presenting together. So I'd like you to prepare, please, and put your presentation up. I know that you're doing it combined, so go ahead. We have some questions, by the way, already, so we'll be keeping an eye on those. Send them through and continue not to be shy, please.
Okay, I hope you're able to see the screen now, the introduction slide.
Yes, perfect. We can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Belen, and thanks, Oliver, also for the introduction. And maybe I'd like also to use the opportunity to give thanks to the whole World Bank team and all the others, also from NTDC that cooperated for this study. As Belen said, Hassan from PPI, who covered the grid part of the study, and me from 8.2, covered the solar and wind part, would be now presenting these about 10 to 12 slides that we prepared. Let me figure out how to switch to the next slide.
Just use the keys, the little arrows, the cursor keys. There you go.
Okay. So again, the leading question for this whole analysis was where are the best spots for solar and wind in Pakistan? And the background for this, and I saw in the chat that there's a few people from outside Pakistan who may not have the background. So there's this new policy from 2019 of 30% of VRE. So VRE meaning variable renewable energies, i.e. Solar and wind, basically, by 2030. So that's a government policy now in place with the goal of having 30% in terms of gigawatts installed within the next 10 years. And then the question comes up, okay, if we're gonna go for that, what are the commercially and technically most viable spots for this, for the implementation of doing that? And the easy answer that sometimes people think of is, okay, we have a solar map of the solar radiation of the country, then let's just go to the best spots. And that's correct, that's a big factor of the answer, but that's not the only thing that influences the most viable spots. Another very important, for example, is grid infrastructure. So it doesn't help if you have a huge solar resource in one part of the country, but there's no grid going there, then you have to export it, and there's no infrastructure to do that. The next thing is then, if you have grid, does it have actually free capacity? So is it possible to insert more power to that grid, or is it already overloaded with the existing power plants and loads? So that analysis needs to be factored in somehow. And then there's others like available land. Is there land available at those spots where you want to put up a plant? And also others like portfolio optimization, meaning rather than having all plants in one part of the country, very concentrated, you want to have to balance them out so that across the different parts of the country. And combining all those factors, if you balance them in a good way and factor them in, you should come up with the best locations, most viable locations for setting up the solar and wind power plants. And best in this case means in terms of LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, if we make a financial model of setting up a plant at that specific site, or if we think about future biddings, the best PPA rate that any developer could offer for that specific site. So you should get the lowest quality, lowest price electricity if you go for these strategically best spots within the country. That's the background or idea of the whole analysis. And the next slide shows the same thing again in a little more visual. So the whole analysis was done in GIS format, so geospatial mapping. So this is, for example, the solar resource map of Pakistan, the red spot showing the very high solar radiation spots of the country. And you already see here in the western part of Balochistan, for example, there's huge resources for solar, 10 or red being here the most attractive. But then in the next slides, you'll see that, for example, there the grid infrastructure is missing yet. And then here you have other layers like the grid stations of the whole country, of the different voltage levels, then the transmission lines, protected areas of the country or existing power plants. And all this information were put together to come up with a multi-layer GIS map, and then also combine them in this kind of result map where everything is put together and then again colored in a new map where 10 is the most attractive, factoring in all these different dimensions. And again, blue would be the least attractive. So here, for example, you see again that Balochistan is still quite red because you have the high resources, but now factoring in these grid connections, you see that those areas around the grid stations are still better than those further away because they're closer to the grid. So the connection to the grid would not be that costly. And with that, I'd actually like to hand it over to Hassan, who is the specialist on the grid. He's been working on Pakistani grid since many decades. So Hassan, maybe you can present the next 3 slides. Oh yeah, and this is the same for wind, by the way. Wind is much more localized. We have the best spots here in Western Balochistan and Southern Sindh down here, Jimpir and Garo, as you already know.
Thank you, Tobias. So for the audience, once this background of potential sites or potential locations with rich solar resource and with rich wind resource, one aspect is covered, but the other most important thing is if the grid is available or not, and what is the strength of the grid, and the amount of reinforcement required for providing the grid facilities to the potential renewable sites. So here is on the screen, you can see the overall grid system of Pakistan, which is very congested in north and mid country. And as we go from north to south, you can see that the grid facilities are reducing a bit in the south, but the availability of grid is almost everywhere from north to south, except for Balochistan, where the grid facilities are relatively less. As a matter of fact, we have picked up the locations provided in the as indicated in the previous slides, and then we focused on the availability of grid. So our approach was to see whether the 132 kV, 220 kV, and 500 kV. So these are the three main voltage levels in the grid system of Pakistan. And the size of plant is also considered which level of voltage it should be connected. So in this map, you can see all the voltage levels, but since all these are looking quite congested, so we are just giving you an impression that we have good grid availability all over across Pakistan from north to south. And please, if you go to the next slide. Tobias. Yes. So we performed the detailed grid studies, putting up all the future load forecast, future generation plans, and future transmission plans of NTDC and DISCOs. And then we evaluated the grid connectivity from the perspective that initially we should pick those sites where not much reinforcement is required in terms of money and in terms of time. You know, the lead time to construct a line or a substation is quite longer. So what we did, we tried to pick those locations first where the grid was available very near, roughly from 5 to 10 kilometers. But at the same time, the land availability and, where there is cultivated lands, you cannot normally put the solar plant there. So we have selected actually sort of, you can say semi-barren pockets of lands where grid is also not too far, and the potential sites for renewables, especially solar, are available because solar is all the way available from north to south. Wind is available only in southern wind corridors around Garo and Jimpir, and in western part of Balochistan and Chagi. So we have conducted the detailed grid studies, including load flows, short circuit analysis, and system stability analysis. And initially, we identified the sizes of solar and wind in the range of 50 or 100 megawatt each. And then in the later years, we have selected bigger sizes, which required sort of more reinforcements in terms of adding more 220 kV. And then in the later years, as Oliver has mentioned, that the time as such is not so important. But just to say for year 2030, when the time to construct is available for those facilities. So we have utilized and we have proposed bigger sizes of renewable plants with 500 kV reinforcements, 220 kV reinforcements, and even HVDC. So here in this map, you can see there are circles with the darker shades. These are the circles, these are the locations which are early birds. I mean, where you can put the renewables in the earlier years. I mean, without much reinforcements. Of course, some reinforcement would definitely be required, but not huge. So these circles where the shades are stronger. So these are for earlier years. Then the circles which are slightly bigger and lighter in shade, they are showing bigger potential, and they are anticipated to be in 2025 or 30, or maybe a bit longer in a delayed time horizon, maybe now. But the potential and grid connectivity facilities are identified on these locations, that how much solar and wind you can put. So you can see in near Bahawalpur, in Rojhan, in Manjand, and in Jimpir area, where there is wind also. So we have put hybrid wind and solar together. In fact, we have combined the solar and wind wherever wind potential is available, so that the plant factor of wind plant is increased, and combined together, wind and solar would give you a better plant factor. Similarly, if you can see in the western part of Balochistan, where in the wind and solar maps, resource map, you have seen that in this area, as you can see through this pointer, there is very big resource of wind and solar at the same time. So here we have identified to put a big hybrid plant, roughly ranging to the size of 6,000 to 8,000 megawatt, roughly yani 6 to 8 gigawatt. But the load center is away from this location. Around this location, there is not much local load. So that's why we have proposed an HVDC line from this location up to a mid-country location near Muzaffargarh, maybe, yeah. And this is roughly, roughly 800 kilometer long line. So with this, the overall perspective of grid connectivity and grid availability is provided in this report. And we have achieved the target of nearly 30% by the year 2030, or maybe it can be delayed a couple of years. But we have established that the potential of 30% of installed capacity can be absorbed in the available grid facilities, with the available grid facilities less than for reinforcements and investment in the earlier years, and in the later years with some more investment. But the provision of grid facilities and integrating it in the grid system of Pakistan, covering the stability issues, is not a problem. So that's all I wanted to say about the grid perspective. And this is here, you can see that the initial target was 20% VRE. So we have right now performed the simulations for the cases of 2025, and we have established that 20% VRE solar and wind can be penetrated in the grid system of Pakistan. And then the 30% VRE also can be penetrated in the grid system of Pakistan, maybe by year 2030 or maybe a couple of years later. So this VRE should simultaneously happen across the country. Additionally, for 2030 and after, several large-scale RE hubs up to 5 or 6 megawatt can be further explored in Bahawalpur, Jimpir, and Chagi, I have already mentioned. But the potentials around Bahawalpur and Jimpir are also available for the years beyond 2030. So thank you very much. Over to Tobias.
Okay, thank you, Hassan, for that great part. And I just summarize the second part of the findings. So as Hassan said, we identified all these sites across the whole country and also evaluated the grid connection and the free grid capacities for those. And then we also made a little deep dive into these individual sites, checking out what they could look like in terms of sizing and also the site itself. So for example, if we take Panjgur, which is the one here in Western Balochistan, which is very suitable for PV. Then we made this analysis. So with satellite imaging, we checked, okay, this is the grid station we're talking about, 132 kilovolt grid station of Panjgur. We identified, for example, there's barren land around here, so we could use this square here for the PV plant. That's 2 kilometers away from the grid station, so that connection line needs to be built. And then given the free capacities of that grid station, that's 185 megawatt approximately, which is depicted here as the red line in this chart. What is the optimal size of this solar plant that we should put up at that site? And here, down here, you see 6 different cases that we, for example, analyzed for this site. Of the first 2 lines are the PV and wind capacities that we assumed. So for example, you have a PV wind hybrid case here, and then a solar only case, and then different others. And for this site, we came up that only solar of 254 megawatt would be the optimal solution in terms of financial attractiveness, which is like this factor down here. So that means higher financial attractiveness means lower LCU, lower per kilowatt hour price. So with this setup, we came up that the financial conditions would be best, and the output of that site under that conditions would look like this. And this is 4 days of the year of sample modeled output. This is a day in January, a day in April, in July, and in October. And you see that during the day there's output, and then at night, obviously, there isn't. So this is the kind of the capacity factor of that grid line that you're seeing here. Like the red is the capacity that is available, and we are filling it, if you will, with the yellow amount produced here. And this is actually tracked solar in that case, because we came to the conclusion that given grid capacity, tracked solar is the best option to best use this available capacity. So doing this kind of specific analysis, we came up with this whole list of priority sites. So all the sites that you saw on the map, we have listed them in a ranking table that's included in the report that you can, by the way, download on the World Bank pages now. That's specifically according to this financial attractiveness. So giving those spots of the country are the highest, which give the best LCOE rates. Now, the conclusion is co-locating of solar and wind definitely makes sense if we talk about a specific evacuation capacity that we have. So if you combine solar and wind, because they don't produce always on the same time, you get this correlation effect, and you can have a higher capacity factor of the available grid connection, and such also bring down the overall costs. So in terms of tender, that should be reflected such that bidders are allowed to propose hybrid solar and wind plants. And we can discuss more in detail in the question and answers how that could look like. And environmental and social impacts can be largely avoided by screening out the best spots for this land. There's lots of barren land in these areas that we identified. And in terms of water, there's also there's a little bit of water needed for PV cleaning, but that can be dealt with by water conservation measures. This is just one slide on how this could look like in 2030. So this is 1 week in May 2030, assuming that all these plans that we are proposing are built. And then you see here, the red is the demand. So this is the peak of the day, and then it goes to night and peak of the next day. So here we see the peak of the whole country of around 40 gigawatt. And the yellow here would be, for example, the solar production, and the blue would be the wind. And the gray down here is all the rest. So that would be oil and coal and hydro also. And you see that the solar production of each of these years matches nicely with the red line of the demand. So you see that if you compare, for example, the fluctuation of the red line, which is the demand across the week, and you compare the gray line, which is everything apart from the VRE sources, you see that the gray is not more variable than the red one, but rather less. So the resulting remaining energy that needs to be provided by other sources is even less fluctuating than the original demand. So that's the effect that you get by portfolio and natural balancing by placing these plants all over the country. And for achieving these targets, we also, similar to the tractable study also mentioned by Oliver, we recommend, especially on this, when thinking about the future, major grid investments and also operational changes like a dynamic line rating, real-time measurement, real-time dispatch, real-time forecasting, and also maximum usage of existing grid infrastructure. And with this, I'm coming to the last slide, just a summary of our recommendation. So as mentioned, we have this list of ranked sites that are practically ready to tender. So our recommendation is to go ahead with tendering these sites according to their attractiveness. And that includes the whole country, as you have seen on the table, that includes all provinces, with the best spots in Balochistan and Sindh. And again, no new grid infrastructure is required up to this target of 20%. And after that, investments are needed. Allow the bidders to determine the best technology setup and hybrid combination. So as solar and wind have a benefit, this freedom should be given to the bidders. There should be given a security to the bidders of 25 years for the PPA agreement so that they can reach low bid prices. And then these long-term infrastructure investment should be initiated right now. For example, this HVDC line from Chage to Muzaffargarh and maybe some others. And then also initiate forecasting, real-time dispatch, measurement, dynamic line rating to allow maximum usage of the already existing grid infrastructure. And with that, I'd like to keep it there and head it back to Belen for questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Tobias and Hassan. It's been a very interesting presentation and very valuable takeaways there. So that you know, we have like a whole conversation going in the questions. So obviously what you've said, a lot of people have questions on it and have opinions. So please also join the conversation. You guys are already doing a very good job. But I'd like to ask our next speaker, Wasim, to please unmute your microphone. If you could please introduce yourself, sir, and then just go ahead and give your presentation, that'd be highly appreciated. We cannot hear you, sir. Could you unmute your microphone?
Okay, okay.
Now I can. Yes, perfect.
Yes. And hi to everyone. My name is Muhammad Wasim Yunus. I'm working as Chief Engineer Transmission Planning NTDC. And my total experience in power sector of Pakistan is more than 30 years. Okay, and I shall present from NTDC what our comments on Pakistan Renewable VRE location study, which has been sponsored by World Bank. So you must be, everyone can see the slides which I'm sharing?
Yes, sir. We see a slide that says reactions at the top.
All right. So I would present reactions from NTDC, and NTDC definitely appreciates the initiative and support of World Bank, as well as the efforts of the consultants in conducting this VRE location study, which spanned on more than 18 months. And we have been involved in this study from finalization of its TOR, provision of system data to the consultants, some discussions, and also on comments on to the draft report. Final report and its annexures, they have been presently under review. They have been, because this final report was shared just 1 week ago. Anyway, after review of the main report, we found out that studies provide ranking-wise VRE sites and zones, and definitely it is very critical and important decision for induction of VRE generation in Pakistan. However, a confirmation of discourse is required on the proposed interconnection schemes and grid reinforcements, which have been presented in this report, because in the short-term scenario mainly, and also in the medium, the VRE plant shall be connected with 132 kV grid system, which is handled by DISCOs. NTDC, on the other hand, has looked upon the impact of this VRE plants on its 500 and 220 kV primary system. Plus, a study has indicated that pre-feasibility of sites, of the identified sites, in all provinces is also required, except in the province of Sindh. And in Pakistan, competitive bidding is going to be first carried out for category 3 power plants. They are included in the zones and sites, interconnection ready zones and sites, but they have not been exclusively indicated by their names. I think it shall have to be extracted from the report, because first the competitive bidding shall be carried out for category 3. This report has presented an overall ranking of the IRZ for all candidate power plants. And one important point is that this report is based on system data for 2 years ago. And during these 2 years, the year-wise load demand and generation capacity requirements have been reduced due to lower growth rate in economy and also due to impact of COVID-19. And consequently, the transmission expansion plans of DISCOs and NTDC, which were assumed for different scenarios, they shall be shifted in time. So it will result in the shifting of the timelines and quantum of future wind and solar generation identified in different scenarios. They will remain the same, but time-wise, for example, all the plants which have been identified in 2023 scenario, they may be shifted maybe 1 year or so, little later, but they shall remain the same. Similarly, for medium-term scenario, it may be shifted because overall load demand and overall future generation capacity requirements, they shall be reduced. And I would like to add that presently our indicative generation capacity plan is under preparation, and it shall be available in April 2021. And with this, percentage-wise, their share will remain the same, but the quantum or the magnitude shall be reduced in accordance with the total generation capacity. So quick recommendations are that comments of DISCOs, distribution companies, they need to be obtained on priority basis, because we have been waiting, rather the entire power sector of Pakistan was waiting for this report. Provincial energy boards, they need to conduct pre-feasibility study of the sites, except in Sindh, on priority basis. And there are some follow-up works for VRE induction, which are going to be initiated or carried out in parallel. Okay. One of them is implementation of SCADA system in our control center, implementation of centralized weather and VRE forecasting system, and extraction of competitive 3 plants from the report. So for their RFP documents need to be initiated. And there is another, as a next step, operational and flexibility studies are need to be conducted in parallel. I think World Bank or any other agency may fund these studies as a next study. First of all, there was VRE planning study, then VRE locational study. I think if World Bank agrees or any other donor agency agrees, then we shall go for the next step of studies. And these can be done in parallel to the what has been done so far, because these plants shall be inducted on the basis of these studies. I think the first set of RE plants from competitive 3, their timeline shall be in 2023, I hope. So in parallel, we need to also conduct these studies and also implement SCADA and the different forecasting systems, so that we can effectively manage the VRE generation in our grid system. So with this, next, I shall conclude, and thank you very much from NTDC side.
Thank you very much, Wasim, for your presentation. I have to tell you, all of you, thank you very much for your presentations. And it's now time for the Q&A, and we have a lot of questions going. I'm going to get the ball rolling with one of them. I know that many of you have already been answering some of the questions. You know, we have at the moment 23 answered questions. So clearly, you know, there has been conversation going. Mr. Wazim, if you'd like to remain also answer questions, please go ahead. And otherwise, we'll just keep going with you guys, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so let me start with one, and then I'd like to open it up so that you guys can also, if there's a question you'd like to answer, and Oliver as well, if you would like to, put some question on the table, please go ahead. We have 20 minutes, so there is a lot that we can cover. So the first one is from Mehdi, and it says, in our system, we have a problem that when the power is transmitted from a long distance, even in 220 kilowatt systems, there is a lot of voltage drop. So in Balochistan, we should not consider solar through the national grid. It should be distributed through the local network. So who would like to take that question?
Okay, let me answer.
Go ahead, Hassan.
The grid perspective. So let me jump into this. You see, the distributed renewable integration is one thing that is going on in Balochistan area, and in terms of net metering also now people are putting up solar panels, rooftop panels, and they are integrating with the grid. That is going on. But for bigger solar plants, and especially wind potential in Balochistan, we need to exploit that potential to inject that power into the national grid. And once the power gets into national grid, it goes all over the grid. And this will help in voltage regulation, because when local generation is available in terms of renewables, especially solar and wind in Balochistan, it will improve the voltage profile. Because right now Balochistan receives power from national grid, that is from Guddu, and through long transmission lines it goes to Sibbi and then to Quetta. But if we provide local generation in Quetta and Sibbi and Gawadar area and other areas, so it will support voltage locally. So it will be more beneficial for Balochistan grid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hassan, for that answer. There's another question here for you, if you don't mind. I'll just ask from Sulfikar Memon, and he asks, Mr. Hassan, thanks for the presentation. Can you share can you share possible weak grid issues and mitigation proposed as 20%, 30% penetration of renewable energy comes in? So, how do you mitigate for that variability?
Yes, for variability, we have proposed to improve the forecast level. Actually, that's why we have proposed to have a centralized forecasting, bankable forecasting, that is 4-hour ahead forecast, a day ahead forecast. And with the improvised level of forecasting, you can very well control the variability. And also now that the new technologies in terms of battery storages are coming up, and in terms of providing bigger active spinning reserve in this system, because now 1100 megawatt unit of nuclear is coming in the system in this year. So with that, NTDC would be required to maintain hot active spinning reserve more than 1100 megawatt, and that more than 1100 megawatt available active spinning reserve in the system will be good enough to tackle this variability issue, and with the other bankable forecasting system, so variability can be managed. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tobias.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, what I found really interesting is because we located these plants so decentrally across the country, so we utilized grid infrastructure that's already existing in many places. So this weak grid issue doesn't fall in so heavily, because like you add a little bit solar here and a little bit wind there, and it kind of blends into the whole what's happening anyway of load going back and forth. So yeah, it was surprising to me that you can integrate so much VRE by just putting it strategically and without even thinking too much about the weak grid issues. So the weak grid is there, but it's not so much dependent on this first 20% of VRE. That's my takeaway based on what Hassan and his colleagues did in this analysis.
If you, Gerwin or Oliver, would like to add anything, please just let me know anytime, okay? Just feel free. Let's go to another question, and I'll let you open to all of you, whomever wants to take it. It is the concentration of variable renewable energy in some targeted clusters will enhance the need for strong ancillary services availability, especially short-term reserve to maintain the network integrity and stability. What mechanism is expected to be used to cover this nevralgic need? So who wants to take that? Tobias,
I think
Hassan, go ahead.
Partly I have answered to this question in terms of reserves. You see, the reserve looks at the system as a whole. So it doesn't matter if you are putting some plants at some places, but the reserve as a whole controls the frequency of the system. And in any variability or any tripping of a generating unit anywhere in the system, so these reserves are spread all across the system from north to south. The reserves are not localized. So the concept of reserves is not clear here for many people who think that the reserve has to be at a local place where you are putting renewable, so the reserve should also be there. No, the reserve looks at the system across the board. So from that perspective, the future reserve, which is going to be spread out through governor action on all the generating units that we are recommending now, and that NTDC and the NPCC are going to implement it in future. And even now there are governor actions at many power plants. So they will look into the overall system reserve. So no need to put the local reserve where you are putting the renewables. It's not essential. The reserve is spread all across the system. Thank you.
Any of you want to add anything? I wonder whether the question was no more whether there is any specific place for maybe batteries to come in and play a role, because that's possibly what I was thinking when I read this. It was kind of hinting at the ancillary levels at a very localized place. But should we move along then to the next? If solar will be added to existing wind power plants, then how will a hybrid tariff will be decided? The existing wind power plants has very high tariffs compared to, excuse me, the question just moved and I lost it now. 1 second. So I don't know what happened, but I think the question just disappeared from me. So anyway, how will be hybrid tariffs be decided? There you go.
On hybrid tariff, I will invite Gerwin to respond.
I was the one that actually answered that. So sorry, Belen, I think I took it away from you.
You did, it doesn't matter.
So actually there's a typed answer now. I think, Goen, you may want to come in, but the answer I gave is that in most cases, those projects would just be co-located. So where there's an existing wind project and a solar project comes along, it would obviously have a separate tariff. But the point about a hybrid is that they're in the same substation, they're using the same assets for transmission and power. Under competitive bidding, though, that may change. And if there is a technology agnostic competitive bidding round, where the authority that's doing competitive bidding is not saying we want solar or we want wind, but they're saying we're happy to have either solar and or wind, you may get projects coming forward that combine solar and wind and then offer one tariff to the purchasing agency, and they actually combine them themselves. So competitive bidding makes these issues a lot easier to deal with. And I think the government's stated policy is that all future renewable energy projects should be subject to competitive bidding.
Thank you, Oliver. That makes a lot of sense. And to be honest, it's just easier, right? You just say the time that you need the energy on, how much energy, and then let them worry about the tariff and about what energy they use. It makes a lot of sense. So that was the answer then. And sorry about the issue with the question. Okay, next question. We still have another 9 minutes, so we have. Please let the audience know what are the results on the dynamic stability of the system, especially reactive power balance of the system. Are these aspects analyzed in this study of location of VREs? Thank you.
Okay, so it's again a grid stability issue. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fine. So we performed in our grid interconnection studies for all the penetration of these 20% and 30% power. And we performed all the stability studies, and we have found that there's no issue of system stability as such. And so far as reactive power compensation is concerned, we have actually provided the provisions for every developer of renewables in the grid code addendum of wind and solar, that every developer has to comply to provide the reactive power support in that plant. See, there is an ancillary service that every wind and solar power plant will supply a significant amount of reactive power to the system. So, like a conventional synchronous generator, of course, these wind and solar do not have that, but in addition, they can add SVCs and switch shunt capacitor banks to supply the reactive power to the system. And grid code makes it mandatory for all RE power plants to maintain a power factor of 0.95 at the point of common coupling or at the point of interface where the power would be evacuated. So based on that, there is no issue of reactive power. Each RE plant is required to supply a significant amount of reactive power to the system and play its role in voltage control and keep the system within the voltage limits as the system requires. So with this compliance, we have seen that there is no voltage issue. Even now you can see that in Jimpir area and wherever the solar plants have been installed in Cholistan area, Bhavalpur, they are supporting the system voltage. They are not causing any problem to the system voltage, and they are good enough to supply reactive power to the system. And there are no stability issues as such.
Thank you very much, Hassan. I'd like to give you each the opportunity now, if you like to pick one of the questions that you're answering. I can see that you're being very active in answering them all and just maybe explaining it live so that more people would understand it. So Gerwin or Tobias, could you take one of the questions and just answer it?
What are you saying? Answering the same questions?
Yes, one of the questions that you're answering, maybe answer them live. Because I see that you're being really like, you know.
So maybe let me answer. There were a couple of questions asking about the impact of the volatility of wind and solar and how that would impact the grid again. I mean, we covered.
We're going on around the topic for sure.
Yeah,
most of the questions are about that. Yeah.
Covered a lot of things what need to be done on the grid side, but on the other hand, I think what I would like to stress again is that we've seen that the power production of solar especially is very nicely correlated with the demand profile. So a lot of solar getting into the Pakistani grid will be absorbed by the peak demand at the same time. So therefore there is not that much of additional volatility coming in. Now wind is a little bit different, but it's also a question on the amount of energy. So as long as we talk about less than 20%, there's absolutely no issue to be done anything. And I mean, that gives us another 5-6 years in any case before this question comes really to be serious. Yeah, so I think a lot of things can be done now without considering these questions. Now, when you go beyond 30% in 10 years' time, then this is a different setup, a different scenario.
Tobias, how about you? Have you seen any questions you'd like to answer live? And there is still so many coming.
Yeah, I'm just trying to read them all. I was following the conversation, so maybe Oliver or Gavin want to tackle another one.
Oliver, how about you?
Most of these are actually technical, and so I feel like there's still quite a few that maybe Hassan, Mr. Zaidi could take on. For example, around managing looking at the ancillary services. So there's this question from Andre Larocque. Hassan, do you want to take that?
Let me find it. Andrew Larocque.
I can read it. So the concentration of VRE in some targeted clusters will enhance the need for a strong ancillary services availability, especially to short-term reserve, to maintain the network integrity and stability. What mechanism is expected to be used to cover this need? So I would firstly say that we did cover, a lot of this is covered in the report we published in November, and you'll see in some of my answers, I referred to that report, and I've also posted a link. And so that report looked at the optimal generation and actually did use Plexos to look at hour by hour balancing of the network and what would be needed. And a few questions came up from that in relation to reserves, in particular to peaker reserves. And also lots of people have been asking about battery storage. So Hassan, do you want to dive in on that, and go in if you want to come in as well? Just bearing in mind that this report, of course, is more focused on where the solar and wind should go. But in any case, let's try and answer that question.
Yes, actually, there are these 2-3 issues which are coming repeatedly from different participants. See, the grid code has made it mandatory for every developer, for every renewable IPP or a plant to provide firstly the reactive power to the system. Number two, to maintain its own connectivity with the system through LVRT, the low voltage right through and high voltage right through. So once they are complying LVRT and HVRT, they will remain connected with the system under the disturbed conditions. That is first thing. We can't afford the renewable plants to be disconnected when there is system voltage dip or any disturbance on the system. So they will be complied to remain connected with the system under any disturbed conditions by maintaining LVRT and HVRT1. Number two is they will install static var compensators or STATCOM or switch shunt compensation in their plant to supply reactive power to the system and regulate the voltage. Number three, in terms of megawatt, see, they do not have the governor action and they can't support the frequency, but whenever there is some frequency disturbance or frequency excursion happening in the system, they will remain connected and would not be tripped. So these are the usual support that these VRE plants provide all over the world. And based on that, their role in the grid connectivity, in the grid stability remains. So these are the main ancillary services: voltage support, frequency support, and maintaining the volatility. As Gervin has also mentioned, you can do better forecasting, you can make better dispatch planning, and then by maintaining, as I said earlier, now NPCC and the system of NTDC will keep at least 1100 megawatt hot active spinning reserve through governor action at spread out all across the country, so that in case this 1100 megawatt unit trips, so the system should stay, it should not collapse. So that would be the minimum requirement for the system, to have that much reserve all the time running and available as a spinning reserve. So I think my answer is providing answer to many questioners, and I think this should be enough.
Erwin, do you want to add anything else? Or you had picked a question, correct?
Yes, there was one other question, that is, what is the input energy density in Balochistan from sun during summer days? What is the conservation efficiency output of the plants we're considering? So I think to answer that on a little bit wider aspect, there was other questions about why don't we cover KP more for solar, for example. Now, in this study, we looked at the cost to be expected cost of solar and wind. And the cost of solar is always the same. The investment cost is more or less the same, independent where you put it. So the cost of electricity you generate from solar is very much dependent on the light and temperatures you're getting at the location where you are. Now, if you look at KP, for example, then we would be getting about 1,500 hours per year full-time usage of a system. And if we go to Balochistan, which is very high, so it's a high plateau, there's a lot of direct light, we will get more than 2,200 hours out of the same investment cost. So therefore, you will see the cost of solar electricity in Balochistan and in Sindh lower than in KP and in Punjab. Yes, so as a general answer to that question. Now in wind, this is similar. Also the capex is mostly the same. And then it's dependent on the availability of wind resource. And we found in the Garo and Jhimpir wind corridor, this is very good. And also in Balochistan and the Chargai area is a very, very good areas. Most of the other areas we looked for hybrid systems, it came out that the expected cost for solar was much lower than wind, even though there is some wind, but it would make more sense cost-wise to just put a larger solar plant.
Thank you very much. Can I ask a question about sort of a bit of the larger picture and climate change in light of what has happened in Texas recently with ERCOT and the rolling blackouts, you know, and like people with many days of no energy, and they don't have like a huge amount of renewables there, you know, about maybe I think 15% roundabout, but still they had all these issues because of they were not ready for the winter. And I think there is a lot of grids around the world that, in light of what's going on with climate change, the changes in temperatures, there is this like black swan weather effects that seem to be coming around more often. Is there anything that we should be doing in the Pakistan grid in order to make sure that it is ready, is climate change ready, and especially as more renewable, variable renewable energy is added into the grid? So I'll just leave it out there for you guys to respond.
That's a very good question. I think, Hassan, you should come in on that. I would say one thing that we highlighted in the last report that we published on variable renewable energy integration and planning, which of course looked at all generation sources, is that thermal sources which are reliant on cooling do obviously suffer issues both with regard to heat and with regard to availability of water, fresh water. And so this is something that needs to be factored into the long-term planning of those two issues. Of course, they do not affect renewables in the same way. Questions are being asked about, will the solar availability, or in particular the wind availability, be the same if the climate changes? And of course, that's very, very hard to predict. My answer to that is, of course, it will be somewhat location specific. And it could go up as well as down in different locations. So there is research happening on that topic, but it's very, very hard to answer right now definitively that solar is going to get better or worse, or wind is going to get better or worse. I think it's with much more certainty possible to say that the system itself will need to be hardened to deal with climate, the impact of climate change. And maybe Hassan, you could just talk a little bit to what would need to happen on, for example, the transmission system to take account of rising temperatures.
Yes, firstly, I would like to say that the life cycle of a renewable plant is 20 to 25 years. So the climate change, although it's happening, but not as rapidly as it might reverse the wind availability or solar availability within the span of 20 to 25 years so drastically that a plant we have installed now would be redundant, say, maybe after 10 years. So that's what I don't expect. So far as the impact on transmission lines capability is concerned, yes, there is the dynamic rating in different weather conditions and seasonal conditions. In winter, when the temperature is low, the power carrying or the current carrying capacity of the lines is increased, and because of the low ambient temperature. And in summer, their current carrying capacity is compromised, that is low. So that's why we have also recommended in this report that the dynamic rating should be followed when the dispatch policy is determined. So with the climate change, of course, somewhere winter might shift or summer might shift. But as I said earlier, that these changes, of course, are happening, but not so rapidly as they will over cross the life cycle of a RE plant. Thank you.
Belen, there's a question that just came in. I think it's from one of my colleagues because it has a WB at the front. But what is the best approach to hook up VRE within small distances with low voltage or medium voltage? I think that's actually one of the things that comes out quite strongly from this report, in particular in the near-term horizon, which is that this is one of the things we were very, very keen to look at as part of this study, which is people often assume that major investment is needed to incorporate solar and wind, and that you're going to need to build lots of large new transmission lines. And certainly the report shows that to get to 30%, which of course is a huge amount of capacity, that we're talking about 20 gigawatts of new capacity to get to 30%. You do need to start building new lines. And in particular, there's this project in Balochistan that the consultants have mentioned. But to get to 20%, which is a lot less power because it's not just less percentage, but it's also in a shorter time frame, you're looking at basically building small amounts of solar and some wind, but in particular small amounts of solar in areas around, in lots and lots of different areas in small parcels. And so that is looking at the low voltage and medium voltage system. And of course, linked to that is the issue of distributed generation and what some people might call rooftop solar, which is happening already in Pakistan and will probably continue to happen and accelerate. And this also needs to be looked at in terms of what impact that will have. And I know CPPA in particular are quite concerned as to how much of that will come on the system and what that will do to the overall demand and supply balance. But yeah, certainly it looked at from a system planning point of view, putting solar on rooftops and putting solar in small clusters is a good thing to do for the reasons outlined in this report, because it actually helps strengthen the system. It makes use of existing capacity, and it avoids the need for expensive reinforcements, which are not needed necessarily in the near term.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Just a couple more questions. Tobias, you've marked one of them. Someone that has asked about a hybrid setup. How do you see, those systems come down in price, and how do they need to be designed to be competitive? So perhaps, you can take and answer that one.
Yeah, I was just thinking we could just briefly touch upon the topic because we haven't mentioned it. The cost of renewables that all comes up frequently. So the concern whether, even if these are good spots for PV and wind, whether the cost would still be too high for the government to buy, if you look at it purely commercially. And there we found actually that the price has come down very much, and with the good resources you have in Pakistan and in terms of solar, but also in wind for these very specific spots, the price is definitely below the basket price. In the report, we didn't mention any specific LCEs. We converted it to this financial attractiveness to be unit neutral, if you will, because it's hard to estimate, like these prices keep changing, or even costs of in terms of capex keep changing. So we kept it neutral, but it's definitely below the average purchase price of the system. So then the only question is that can come up of, can these provide base load? No, they are more variable. So what kind of backup do we need? But in terms of per kilowatt hour price, it's very competitive. There's no question to that.
Thank you very much, Tobias.
There's a question for me,
sure.
Actually.
Go ahead, yeah.
To answer.
I was going to ask those two. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I only see one, but what is the view of the World Bank Group on funding additional RE projects in Pakistan in the coming decade? If that is in relation to our own financing, and the person has actually said World Bank Group, so that includes the World Bank, which is the public sector side, and the IFC, which is the private sector side. We're very positive on the opportunities in Pakistan on renewable energy. As this study and our previous study shows, there's a lot of capacity that needs to come online. And the way we see this happening in a very effective way is for the public sector to do some of the preparation work, in particular for the larger projects, for the solar and the wind parks. The public sector does have a role in planning out where those go, in funding the core infrastructure. This is something we've done a lot of in India. The World Bank I'm talking about, we've financed shared infrastructure and solar parks in India. And this is something we feel we would like to be involved in Pakistan. For example, the Balochistan project. There's also a lot to be done on renewable energy at the other end of the scale in terms of improving energy access, mini grids, solar home systems, etc. But leaving those aside for now, if we just look at utility scale, we feel that there's a lot to be done here on the public sector side. And then when you come to the private sector side, constructing and financing these 20 gigawatts or so of renewable energy capacity is, of course, a big ask, and we'll need a lot of financing from multiple sources. And certainly my IFC colleagues will be very keen to be talking to good project developers about that side of things. So yeah, we're very positive. Of course, also, we're doing a lot on hydropower, large hydropower. That's in a way a separate business line, but something that we're very actively involved in Pakistan. And then, you know, we're also financing grid upgrades. We've got a large project with NTDC that's running right now. And so there's a lot of these things all come together to really create the power system of the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. That was great. Actually, one of the questions here as well was about the auction prices that I wanted to ask Tobias. So Tobias said, do you have any idea of what the auction prices would be like? Perhaps we don't know exactly what they would be like, but we can look at, you know, the cost reduction percentages in other areas.
I would actually not venture into that right now because I'm also not too involved in the local market, and there hasn't been bidding since a few years now, I would say, except maybe a few small projects. So it's hard to predict. You kind of course, use the international market and say prices have come down, but I wouldn't venture into specific prices right now.
Let me just add to that. I agree that we shouldn't start putting in actual prices on the table. Obviously, the price to beat is the current benchmark tariff from NEPRA. But that's, in our view, quite high compared to where prices could go under competitive bidding. I think if people are interested in this topic, the thing to look at is what are the prices that other countries have achieved and how have they achieved those. So looking at UAE and Saudi Arabia and looking at India and other similar countries with similar resource levels, what kind of prices have they achieved? In fact, they're very, very low. But you also need to look at what are the constituents of those prices. So in some countries like UAE, they've got very, very low cost financing, probably lower than what Pakistan would be able to achieve. And so that the prices there are particularly low. In India, it's a very, very competitive market right now where a lot of cost reduction has already happened. So you're not going to see immediate cost reductions to those levels in Pakistan with competitive bidding. It'll be a journey. But this is why it needs to start sooner rather than later, because we need to kind of get the tariff down that cost curve. And that only comes through learning and through doing. So this is what's important to focus on.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we're more or less to the end of the session, and it's a shame because there is still so many open questions, but I felt there has been such a flurry, you know, there's 55 answered questions as of now, and the questions keep going up. We will send this to you guys so that you can take a look at them. You know, we wish there was more time. It just seems like all of a sudden, you know, we're hit in so many different directions. So thank you very much for your time, Hassan. Thank you very much, Gerwin and Tobias. And of course, Oliver and Mr. Wasim that had to leave us earlier, but he was also here. We also had 2 people answering questions at the back. So thank you very much. This is why it all went so quickly, you know, and there were so many things happening. So thank you very much for our audience. And I think this is the time where the next step's taken and you guys start building those plants because there is so much capacity for VRE and in Pakistan. We're looking forward to the next conversation around this topic. Oliver, do you want to close with any words?
Nothing major more to say, but thank you very much to everybody for attending. I think this is the most answered questions I've ever seen in a webinar. And we still got 17 open, so apologies to those we couldn't get to. Thank you very much to the consultants for, I think, what is an excellent report. We're very, very happy with it. And of course, big thank you to NTDC colleagues and also the other federal agencies that provided comments that I listed. We're very, very keen. We're very, very happy with the collaboration we've seen on this study and the one we did beforehand. And of course, it's not possible to do these kinds of studies without that collaboration and the feedback and the comments that we've incorporated. So thanks to everybody. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn if you have further questions. Always happy to correspond there. And please read the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To read the report, you just have to follow the link, and don't forget, we'll send you the links again with the presentations and the recordings, and also we'll put a link to the report so that you can download it. I mean, it will take you to where to download it in the World Bank. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye.